My career sucks.
Sex just isn't the same.
What's my purpose?
Where did this fat come from?
My relationship is killing me.
I'll never be happy.
My debt is piling up. I'll never find love. Why can't I be like other gay guys? Hey guys, it's time to get a grip, stop whining, make a bold move, and do something amazing with your 40-plus gay life. Let's get to the show with your Tell It Like It Is host, Rick Clemens, who does his best to never act like a dick or a diva unless you act like one first.
Okay, so you're sitting there, you see the calendar date, and it's going to be your birthday, and you're going to be 40. Or 41, or 42, or 43. And suddenly life feels like it's over. Oh, boys, men. It's not over. In fact, it can be pretty freaking amazing. And that's what we're talking about today on 40 Plus Gay Men, Gay Talk. And I just want to dive into this with somebody who's already been on my other podcast. And he's done some pretty amazing stuff, and we'll get into what his latest project is here. But after we had talked a little bit about that podcast and his newest project, we shot a couple emails back together and said, hey, you might be a good fit for this one too. And then he just sent me this whole list of stuff that his 40s and what he's done. And I'm like, you are going to be on this podcast. His name is Anthony Hand. And I'm not going to really tell you a whole lot because I want to leave the big reveal about what he's working on to a little bit later. But he's a guy over 40. Are you still breathing, Anthony? You know, are you still are you still alive?
Breathing and laughing.
Okay, thank God. Thank God. And I'm not knocking any of these guys who like, okay, you know, aging, hey, it is what it is. But, you know, I'm not knocking a guy who's like really having a struggle with it. And I'm hoping we can bring some levity to that conversation and, you know, just really some insights. So have you ever struggled with like the whole aging thing? I guess that's a good place to kind of start.
You know, probably the one time I did was when I was 25 and I realized, oh my God, I'm 1/4 of the way to 100. But since then, I really haven't. And I mean, my birthday's never really been like a big cause of celebration, but
right.
I mean, it's not like I throw like these big, you know, these big incredible parties, except for my 50th.
But I kind of know, I'm like, girl, I'm going to call you out on that because that's not what you said in your email. I'm like, there's a big party that happened when you turned 50. But,
yeah, but otherwise, it's a great excuse to get together with close friends and, you know, just reconnect with a small group of folks. Is what I typically do.
Right. You know, I've never been a big birthday person. It kind of drives my family nuts. You know, yes, we had a big 40th. My 50th was probably the one that hit me the hardest because guys that have listened to this podcast have heard this a couple of times, but it's worth repeating because you may be a new listener. So when I turned 50, my oldest daughter our oldest daughter, my oldest biological daughter, was going to college. My youngest daughter was starting high school and I was turning 50, and that all happened in like a 30-day period. And I went off the deep end. Not bad, but just like, oh my God. And thank God my husband and I we were doing like a last minute cruise. And I really needed to be on that cruise to like, okay, things will be fine. But even when we got home, I was still like, you know, wow, one of them's gone, you know, and the other one's like, I'm doing my stuff, Dad. I don't really need you, even though that was when really the challenge started with her. But that was the one that kind of, you know, kicked me in the ass. But then I rebounded pretty quick. And then a lot of interesting things started happening professionally, which always kind of seems like once we hit the 40s, the professional stuff kind of kicks in too. So that's kind of what got you. I'm going to kind of like, you just kind of start taking us down the path here because I know jobs changes started moving you about the country, so to speak.
So a quick summary to lend some context to my own adventures in life. But I grew up in a small farm in Michigan in a village of 600 people. So a really sort of very humble background there. And I went to college and it was just like, you know, the door to the world started opening up. And after college, I moved to DC and lived in DC for a couple of years, working for a nonprofit high school exchange student program called YFU. Then I went to Japan and taught English for 3 years. It'd been a dream of mine since childhood to live abroad. So I finally got a chance to realize that. And while I was living in Japan, I got a chance to travel all over Asia and even went to New Zealand. then after that, I came back to America, and this was now 1997. So I went to, or 96 rather, I went to grad school at University of Michigan and got a master's degree in software design, which was just perfect timing being in the middle of the .com boom at the time. And then so my 20s, or I should say my 30s is when I really started working professionally. And I felt in some ways like I was a decade behind my friends who'd already bought their house and already bought their nice fancy car and stuff. But in my 30s, I lived in Boston and had an amazing time living in a big city. So this small town country boy finally got a chance to live in the big city and started having some adventures. And then when I turned 40, that was when I moved to Chicago. So I had a dual purpose 40th birthday party and bon voyage party. So it was a little bit bittersweet. And I went off to Chicago for 2 years, and then now I've been in San Jose, about an hour south of San Francisco, for a decade.
But you said something that was really interesting, is like, oh, I feel so far behind. And I think that's something that all of us as we age, we suddenly like, well, we either feel really far behind or suddenly, wow, things are starting to move a lot quicker, you know. But I do hear this a lot with gay men, like, I should be further along. I should have more. I should be here. And okay, that's a reality check, I guess, to some degree. But when I'm working with someone in my practice and that keeps coming up, I'm like, okay, but what if you didn't think that way? What would start to be different for you? You know?
It's so hard not to compare yourself to others when you especially like to focus on their successes and their happinesses. And, you know, you have your own path through life, and, you know, you're responsible for creating your own successes and happiness.
I know I constantly find myself comparing myself to others, going, oh, I wish I didn't have these 6-pack abs. You know, I really wish I didn't have a bubble butt. You know, I'm kidding, of course, but but I can tell you this, that so in my mid 40s is when kind of my professional stuff like really changed too, because I got laid off from my last corporate job in my mid 40s. And that was the second one in like 6 years. And that's when I was just like, okay, done. I can't, I'm not going to do this anymore. And now I'm doing it again, but in a lovely place where I just love what I get to do. And there's a lot of freedom in it. But man, that suddenly like kicked a lot of other stuff into gear. I started getting in shape a little bit more. I ended up, it was actually kind of the begin. Well, no, I guess that was the middle of my spin cycle career. I was teaching spin at a lot of different gyms. I'm like, wow, you know what? Now I have a little more free time. So I became like a spin monster. I mean, it actually wasn't even healthy. I mean, most of my fellow instructors were like, you're a little bit crazy about this spin stuff. I mean,
it's easy to get into it. I love spinning too.
Yeah, but 20 to 25 classes a week teaching that's a lot, you know. Of course, you're as an instructor, you can hop on and off the bike, you know, and all that sort of stuff. But but you kind of started doing the same thing. I mean, there was some like, you know, changes in how you took care of yourself and exercising, and you did kind of a big bike ride and all this sort of stuff. So was it like a moment where you're like, okay, bitch, you just got to get in shape and all this, or did it just kind of like, I know for me, even now as I'm working through like, gotta lose the COVID, it's more because, okay, yeah, I want to just kind of feel good. It's not like, oh my God, you're so fat and ugly. It's like, once you start hitting a certain age, it's like, okay, things, man, it takes a little bit longer to get up out of bed in the morning and all that sort of stuff.
Does.
But what started happening for you? Yeah.
So when I moved to California in 2011, I'd been used to living in the big city for a decade plus and walking all around, and I barely used my car throughout my 30s, honestly. So I just got a lot of natural exercise by just walking everywhere around town. And when I moved to California, you know, there's, at least if you're not living in San Francisco, then public transit's not great. So I started driving my car every day. And honestly, within about 5 months of living here, I think I'd put on more than 20 pounds. And I was not really happy with myself and how I was looking. And, you know, some friends and I went up to Napa for a long weekend, Memorial Weekend that year. And I was just not happy with who I saw in the mirror. So a buddy of mine had suggested I join him at the gyms. And so it started at 6:30 in the morning. 6:30 in the morning is usually before my alarm clock had even thought about ringing. So I thought he was insane. But since I wasn't really happy with where I was, and I clearly wasn't making it to the gym on my own, I decided to join this group class. And this group class was like 20 minutes of stretching, 20 minutes of spinning, and 20 minutes of rowing. So this was the first time I'd had like this kind of a structured workout, and it worked for me. Like nothing else ever worked for me in the gym. And of course, in the 20s, you go to the gym, you lift a 10-pound weight, and boom, you've got like biceps and a flat stomach. And so in the 20s, it's like you don't have to worry about it. But when I was in my 40s and moving to San Jose, this is when I really discovered for me how to make fitness work as a lifestyle.
Right.
So I did that for about 2 years. And the first thing of kind of interesting note about my fitness journey was that my instructor started training me to participate in this rowing marathon. And I thought, I'll do it for shits and giggles, I'll just sort of start the training, but there's no way I could row equivalent to 26 point whatever 4 miles. And so one day, after being in the gym for 3 hours and rowing, I made it through. It was fine. She goes, "So how you feel? You ready for the marathon in 2 weeks?" I'm like, "Oh God, no, there's no way I could do that." She goes, "You realize you're only 7,000 meters from from a full marathon? You just did it." And this kind of blew my mind. I really hadn't thought that I could ever do that. And then a month later, after I did it, I thought, well, maybe I'll try a new goal. And since I'd been in this class with spinning and rowing both, I thought maybe I'll ride a bike for 100 miles. Now, keep in mind, I didn't even have a bike at that time. So I talked with a friend, and he said, "Well, sure, we can train with you for that ride, because there's this bicycle charity ride from San Francisco to LA. It takes place every year in early June. It's 550 miles roughly. Down the California coast. It's beautiful. And we would do these training rides every Saturday. You can train with us. We start at 20 and we work our way up to 90 miles in a single day." And I thought, all right, that sounds great. And then I started enjoying it so much, I just went ahead and signed up for it. And I raised $10,000, which is pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
And then that June, I did it, and it was terrifying and amazing. And I thought I would just be writing checks for friends. I never thought in my life I could actually accomplish something so physically demanding, so mentally demanding. Yeah. And of course, I got thin that year. I was really looking good. That was a nice bonus.
Yes, it is. I always wanted to do that. And we lived in Southern California at the time. And that's when I was cycling a lot. I'm like, oh, I can do this. Because when I got laid off from my first job, well, not my first job, but laid off from my big corporate job before the second one that I got laid off, I had a year off. And that's when I started spinning and everything. I'm like, I'm going to cycle too. So in the mornings I'd get up, do the job board thing and all that stuff. And then I lived in Laguna Beach at the time. I'd hop on my bike and I'd ride my bike all the way up the coast to Long Beach and back. And people are like, "I can't believe you do that." I'm like, "Oh, well, why?" It's not that. And I'm like, "Oh, it is kind of far, isn't it?" And 60, 70 miles a day. I mean, I didn't start out doing that, of course, but I was like, hey, I love this. And I still try to cycle. I broke my wrist early this year. And so that's kind of, I can cycle, but putting any pressure, even just regular, there's a certain point where you're like, okay, the hands hurt and the shoulders, no matter how good your posture is. But I noticed for me that everything started kind of culminating in taking care of myself, eating better, thinking of all the other things, sexually making sure I'm doing what I need to do, taking care, popping the little purple pill, so to speak, and making sure that, hey, if I'm going to go play around and we're going to have fun as a couple, I want to make sure I'm safe. But also I had a stroke. 2 years. I'm trying to think now. It's been 2 or 3 years ago now. And it kind of woke me up. Luckily, it wasn't like a huge stroke. It was enough that it blinded me for like 24 hours. And it's always kind of kept me now on my toes, even though I don't I'm gonna say I'm 100%. Hey, I'm not the fit specimen, but I feel like I do pretty good. I get out every day and exercise. I mean, this morning I'm gonna go swim, and it's either swimming, walking, biking. Something happens every day. I need to get back to the
Yeah.
weights, but I hate weights. I hate. It's just like the strength exercise. It's like I'm so bored. Really, I'm so bored. But
Yeah. Well, the key is just making it a part of your daily lifestyle.
exactly, that's the thing. And I
Yeah.
know a lot of gay men make that a part of their daily lifestyle, and then they're still miserable. And it's like, well, what else are you trying to do if it's just, and I'm not, again, guys, I'm not knocking the gym at all, but it's like you can have the most gorgeous body and you're still miserable because you're more than just the body. There's the mind, there's the way you look at stuff. That's like paying attention to, like, if you're truly miserable in your work, not that I'm like, hey, dump it and move on, but I kind of am like, then dump it and move on, because we work too much of our life,
Mm-hmm.
But even for you, all these things we're talking about, all the big stuff that you had happen from moves and getting back and being fit and doing the bike riding, all that sort of stuff, you also had a little bit of a medical scare too, right?
Oh my goodness. So it was 2018, December, and I'm looking at my 50th birthday coming up in just a couple of months in March. And so I went in, I'm on prep also, which was such a good thing. So if anyone's not on prep, I highly recommend it. Coming of age in the 80s, I thought every time I was going to have sex, I was going to get the AIDS virus, HIV, and then die. So this was the magic pill that I wish I'd had in the 80s. Anyway, so as part of being on prep, every quarter, you have to get a blood check and all of your blood tested and do your full STI panel. And so my insurance company also does an annual, or maybe twice annually, a PSA test. And so in December of 2018, staring 50 in the face, I found out that I had elevated PSA levels. So went back after the holidays and we did a prostate biopsy and discovered that I had stage 1 prostate cancer. Mm. And so this is, something that you never want to hear, of course.
Right.
Fortunately, it appears that it's slow growing. And there is a more aggressive form also that I think if you're treated earlier, you have, of course, much better odds with. So I was blessed to have the slower growing form of it. And so it turns out my father, I very hesitantly came out to my father about my diagnosis, and he'd had prostate cancer as well. And then, so it does appear to be running in my family. Yeah, and I tried to get my brother to go and get his PSAs tested as well, but he's a straight boy. He's very supportive of me being gay, but he does not go to the doctors if he can avoid it, and he avoided it for a while.
But it's interesting because diabetes runs in my family, so I'm very cognizant of, and it may just be I'm borderline, and I mean, I feel like 85% of the time I do pretty good, like watching what I eat, and then the weekend comes and I crash, and then I'm like, okay, not doing that again. But I don't know why I don't want to generalize here, but I'm going to. I don't know why we as men fight some of the stuff that we know to be true. It's like, it's obvious. This exists. So be aware of it, and, all these other things that for some reason, as we age, and then, gay men, sometimes it's because we just want to live our life. We've been told we can't live our life, and so we just live. And then suddenly we're like, my life sucks. Well, I don't know what to tell you, girl.
A long time ago, I worked for Medicaid, and when I was working for Medicaid of Massachusetts, I found out a whole bunch of statistics and things. And one of the things I learned at that time was that men are less likely to seek medical care than women, and this is one of the reasons why women live longer on average than men do.
Yep.
And I wonder if part of it might be this, this whole kind of like deep down, what's the word, where you just sort of manifest this deep down inside of yourself, where you believe that masculinity equals strength. It means I'm not going to recognize weaknesses. And being sick is a little bit of a weakness. I'm just going to just tough right on through it.
Yep.
And that's not really probably the best approach.
Right. And toughing right on through it can be, I'm going to just tough right on through this, and I'm just going to, I don't need a man in my life, and I'm just going to tough right on through it. I'm just going to stick with this job because, at least it pays the bill. I don't think we as men, and then again, I always have to go, and then us as gay men don't realize how much that mental anguish that sometimes we experience is because, I'm just going to call it the way it is, we're being stubborn assholes with ourselves. It's like, you don't have any, okay, I guess us gay men, we do kind of have something to prove, so to speak, because we've been told for so long, you're not good enough, you're not masculine enough, blah, 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 right? So there's this inherent piece that for a lot of us, it's like, okay, I got to do this until we strip away that bullshit piece and go just live, go be, and go improve where you want to improve. And love the opportunity. I guess that's a piece of the whole thing too, is love the opportunity of who you can be, however you define you to be. And I think for me in my 40s and 50s, that's something that I guess I can kind of be a sassy bitch about it now. I'm like, this is what you get. If you don't like it, well, I don't know what to tell you. This is who I am, and I've learned a lot of the power that comes with that, and the peace of mind and the less stress that just like, hey, this is what you get when you unwrap this box. That's about all there is in there. So what is a life lesson you feel like you've started to adopt in your 40s and early 50s that you're like, yep, this is something I'm so glad I figured out?
Well, I think that along these lines that you're talking about, for me, I've learned in my 40s, I did a lot more learning about myself than I think I'd done through most of the rest of my life. And along those lines, I've learned that I'm really, I don't like change. And I realized that I don't always recognize when I'm in a pattern because I don't like change. And I'm kind of like going along in inertia. So part one is to recognize that it's okay to take a risk, and it's okay to give myself permission to try something new. And I find that when I do take a risk and try something different, that it may work out sometimes. Actually, often it does. But the journey, of course, of trying something different is worthwhile also. And so I find this at work a lot. Yeah. And having someone who can help me kind of understand when I am stuck in a rut, and who can give me that kind of feedback on different ways to approach things, has been really, really helpful.
And speaking of trying something new, COVID gave you the opportunity to like dive into something new that you'd been wanting to do for quite a while, which is like the Rick segue to, okay, we've already talked about this, bitch. So now it's time to talk about this on this podcast.
Yeah. So I had come up with this crazy story about a boy who finds a magic wig that turns him into a drag superhero. And during COVID, I kind of continued working in the story, and I finally came up on a great like end-to-end story that I'm really proud of. And I thought, okay, I'm 52 years old now. Well, I guess at that time I was 51. And I thought, I've had this cancer diagnosis, and I had this other health crisis earlier in the year with my eye, a detached retina. And if I don't do this now, it's not like Hollywood is going to read my mind and in sort of an ESP kind of way, read my mind and say, you've got a great story in you. Right. We're going to make this movie. No, that's not going to happen. And so I decided to sort of put some pieces together, and I found a script writer, and we wrote a script. And I was so proud of this story and how it turned out for a movie script. I then found a character designer, and I was so proud of how this came out with the character design. And I've just kept it rolling. And so now I'm actually starting pre-production in just a couple of weeks with an LA-based animation studio. And I'm registering with SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, so they can actually hire like real actors to do this. So by golly, we're going to see this movie hit theaters well, animation takes a while, so it's going to be a little while, a couple years, but it's going to be really amazing.
That's
And
cool.
everyone I've talked to, everyone I've shown this little 2-minute kind of adventure reel concept trailer just falls in love with the story. They fall in love with the characters, and so I know I've hit on something awesome. And this for me, I'm like, if this is my only thing I do in life that leaves a legacy, then I'll be really happy about it. As long as I make RuPaul smile, I want her to laugh.
There you go. There you go. But after we did the other interview and knowing that we were going to talk about this today, I'm curious, do you think if this had come to fruition 10 years ago or 20 years ago, would it feel the same?
You know, I don't think I had it in me to be able to pull all this together 10 years ago. I tried starting a software company in 2002 when the dot-com boom was busting all around us and leaving like a nuclear winter in technology. And so trying to start a software company at that time, it was a failure, long story short, but I learned a ton of it from that experience. And I learned a ton of things about product development and product launch and product support and bringing people together to make things happen like this. So I've been able to carry that with me professionally and build on those fundamental skills. So I kind of consider that failure to be like an expensive MBA that I never got a piece of paper for, but totally lived and achieved. and so now I feel like I'm in a better place.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And, you know, one of the things I've observed, so it's, you know, like I said, in 2006, got laid off. I'm like, fuck this, I'm done. And it was some tumultuous years right there, because I came out in 1999, got laid off from the other job shortly thereafter, not because I came out, but just we were in an acquisition space. So I was in technology too. So as soon as you said that, I'm like, oh girl. I remember those early 2000s. They were not pretty. And then of course I went to a startup right after that. I'm like, oh, I don't know, but I don't know if this is going to make it. And I got laid off from that because they kind of weren't making it, but I had a good 5-year run. But as I started building the business that I have now, and if somebody had said, this is what you're going to do, I would have been like, oh, no way. This makes no freaking sense to me whatsoever. And about 3 years into the journey, which would have been right when I decided, okay, I'm going to become a coach. Suddenly everything from every bit of where I had been in my career started culminating together. I'm like, wow, all that hard ass work I did in the hospitality industry makes sense now that I learned perseverance and how to look at things through lots of different lenses. And then, you know, the professionalism that came and why detail orientation was important and all. And it was such a huge epiphany because I struggled with my business, like right out the gate. I'm like, well, hey, I struggled with a startup right out the gate. So just keep going, man. Just keep going. And as I started to see the writing on the wall that, hey, this business may not make it, I'm like, okay, you need to lean back into what you went through and go, but you had ideas how that business could have made it back then. What do you need to do now? And it was such a valuable lesson because I started to see myself bringing all the different experiences together to help me get where I wanted to go. And even this year, as I made the decision to, go back to work for somebody else, there was a lot of, okay, but what's the advantage to this? And how does this fit into my current life? And how does this set me up to make my business still work? Because I still get to do quite a bit of my own business and stuff simultaneously. Need more coffee, simultaneously. And I don't regret not getting here sooner because I think it's happening at just the right time. You know, my first book came out at just the right time. The second book, it's going to come out soon. It's going to get done one of these days, but it's happening at just the right time. And I think what you're doing with Maxi Luau and bringing this whole thing to life, you're right. You probably didn't have it in you at the time. And if it had been there, who knows what it would have looked like versus what it's going to look like now. You know?
Exactly. Now, it's funny you say that. Just it sort of just culminates at just the right time,
Mm-hmm.
because there's actually, this is kind of a small theme in the movie, is that a queen arrives just at the right time when she wants to, and not before. I forget the exact wording of the line, but it's along these lines.
It is along those lines. And what I love about this is things do culminate at just the right time. In fact, I'm coaching I'm coaching lots of gay men right now, but one guy in particular who's in the throes of the whole transition in career. And he was really determined that, man, this thing's going to happen. It's going to happen quickly. And I'm like, okay, cool. We can, let's march that direction. Right. And now that it didn't happen exactly at the time that he wanted to, he's realizing the beauty of it happening when it's meant to, because he's not pushing, he's not trying to make something happen that's not ready to happen yet. And I guess as a full, come back around the circle, so to speak, I think that's the point of this whole conversation, is things happen and show up in your life when they're meant to, whether you're 30, you're 40, you said at 25, that's when you kind of had your first, oh my God, I'm a quarter of the way, to the deathbed, so to speak. I'm so glad for the stuff that's showing up right now, because I'm much more prepared to be in it. Even not that life's a cakewalk. That's what wine is for. But I'm so glad that I can look at things through a different lens and go, okay, cool, let's go. Okay, cool, that happened. Now, how do we walk through this? I'm going to bring it back to my book, because, it's my podcast and now it has to come back to me. What I've noticed about the book journey, the second one, is it's been a labor of love for almost, it'll be 2 years in February that I started. Some people are going to be like, yeah, so what? That's what it takes to write a book. I'm like, oh no, bitches. I wrote the first one in 6 months. Okay. But I'm realizing the value of this one taking time. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was interviewing another guest, and she was on Life Uncloseted, the other podcast. And she says, you all need to read Rick's book, Frankly, My Dear, I'm Gay. And she's a dating coach, and she's a female, and she's not a lesbian. I'm like, okay, girl. And really? And she's like, because it's got such good information and it's funny. He's hilarious. I'm like, that's what's missing with this current book. I'm not letting my humor come through. I'm trying to be the mass, let's be everything to everybody, right?
Yeah.
And that moment, even though I haven't done anything yet with the book, it was a beautiful moment, because I'm like, you know what? She's right. I need to just cut loose, let my inner diva come out. And my inner diva is not named Maxley Luau. Mine is Lemonade Pop. And when she gets going, girl, I'm telling you, Lemonade does not put up with shit from nobody. And that's the voice that needs to, I want it to be to the masses, so I don't want to go too far to the alter ego space, but I need that humor there, because it is a book about living your life without apologies, and if you're going to slip and fall over your apologies, bitch, you might as well just get a new set of heels, is what I'm saying, but,
it's become like a drag minister. That would be
well, people have told me that. They're like, you really got that minister thing going on. I'm like, you betcha, child. It's there. I was born in the South, and I know how to have those conversations, girls. So let's get down on those knees for lots of purposes. Anyway, but I think this is such a valuable conversation, that if you don't let yourself be in your age and allow it to be everything you want it to be, in my mind, you're cutting yourself short. And I think so many gay men cut themselves short because they get caught up in but I don't look as good. And really, you can. It's just going to be a different shift. It's going to be a different shift in what you look like and how you feel and all that stuff. So before we wrap it up here, I'm curious for you, if somebody is really they're struggling with this, oh my God, I'm getting older thing, other than slapping them upside the head and saying, bitch, just wake the fuck up. What would you say to them? And he's panicking right now, because he's like, if you guys could see his face, he's thinking, that bitch just pulled that question and I got answered now.
Well, this is kind of funny, because now that I'm in my 50s, and so many of my contemporaries or my best friends are within a couple of years around me also.
Mm-hmm.
And these jokes about aging, I think are becoming more common. And I think there's also an undercurrent of I don't want to say fear per se, but we never know what the future holds. And we talk about how wonderful it would be to continue like aging with our best friends together. And that is so, I think, critical too, to have those deep friendships and continue those throughout your life. It's not like you need to start that when you're 25 or 50 or whatever.
Right.
Develop those, because those lifelong friendships are what get you through. So what advice do I have? I think that one thing I talk about with friends is to recognize their beauty of soul and beauty of just who they are as a person and who they embody themselves as. Mm-hmm. And my friends who I make a part of my close circle, I love everything about them. And sometimes it helps a good friend to help you remember what it is about yourself that makes you a good person, and helps to kind of like highlight those good things that you sometimes forget to see in yourself, because when your inner saboteur comes out and starts highlighting every little tiny flaw, you sometimes need to remember it about what's good inside of yourself.
Well, sometimes you just need to remember, just go kick that saboteur in the ass and get it out of there, girl.
That's right.
It's time for it to take a hike. I'm not even going to tell it to sashay away. We don't want to like soil the runway there, but it's like literally tell it to take a hike, Mm-hmm. And I know that's not easy, but I think that's one of the things that's beautiful about as you age, and you can go, fuck off. Like it's literally like, fuck off, and do it in a healthy way. And
there's this Japanese word for middle-aged women who find their confidence in their kind of middle age, and it's obatarian. And I like to think of myself sometimes as a bit of an obatarian, and that's a tough word to say, but that kind of confident middle-aged lady who's like, fuck off. Stand up on the subway and make me a seat, man. I'm old.
Exactly. Now, see, if mine would be, I'm a cougar bitch, and you're gonna respect this cougar. That's just the way it
is. That's right.
Or I'm your daddy. Now let's have a whole nother conversation.
You've got fierce daddy energy going on, I have to say.
Oh, it's funny.
I mean that in a good way.
No, I know that, but it's interesting. It always shows up on this, right? Then you get to my house and you're like, okay, where's Fierce Daddy? I'm like, that's just, it's not a persona. It's like, there's a piece of me that comes out. I couldn't sustain that energy constantly. I mean, my husband would leave. We'd be divorced. we went to have lunch with a friend of ours this weekend, and he's like, oh my God, I'm loving your podcast and your Instagram stuff. He's like, but you're not that way with me. I'm like, of course not, bitch. I can't do that. I only have so much stamina. But well, Anthony, thank you again. We're so excited for what you're creating, and I can't wait to watch the journey. And I think you and I will be like conversing throughout the years as this whole thing comes alive. So
wonderful. I look forward to it. It's always such a pleasure to connect with you.
So don't fuck it up, man. I mean, don't fuck this relationship up. I promise not to, if you promise not to. So
I promise.
Okay. All right. Thanks, man. Good talking to you. Thanks for being on 40 Plus Gay Men Gay Talk. So appreciate you, bro.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's a wrap for 40 Plus Gay Men Gay Talk, where size doesn't matter. We drop our bullshit, get over our screwed up fears, make bold moves, and live life without apologies. Don't forget to join us on Facebook at 40 Plus Gay Men Gay Talk, where the conversations continue.